he called himself a cultural Marxist, and he said Marxism will not prevail by armed rebellion, which was happening around the world. It was happening or attempting, the Bolshevik Revolution, Cultural Revolution. He said it's going to be by a long march through the institutions of Western culture. That's the way that we will prevail. And he identified the institutions. These are the institutions that influence the way people think. It's the entertainment industry, the news media, academia, and churches. Churches, if you can get churches and to drift away from their roots, but they're institutions that you have to undermine the churches from the inside out. And really, the philosophy was we'll prevail by taking over institutions from the inside out, not the outside in. It's not a rebellion. We take control of these institutions that influence the way people think, and then we've won the next generation.
Yeah.
That's exactly what has happened. Anyone who questions that's happened is not paying much attention.
No, I think even the left could admit that that's been the strategy, and they've been darn good at it. They've got a long game, and the rest of America has been on defense or has been in oblivion for the last 50 or 60 years, which is a shame. Let me talk to you about something that's near and dear to both of our hearts, and that is the migration of folk coming from the Northeast to South Carolina, specifically to the coast. And how do you see that impacting hunting, fishing, conservation? I mean, it's pretty clear how it impacts our day-to-day movements. It's pretty clear how it impacts our quality of life. But how does that impact hunting, fishing, conservation going forward for the next 2 or 3 decades?
Well, first of all, as a conservative, I think all conservatives about preserving that which has been handed down to us, being good stewards of it and passing it on to the next generation, whether it be the value system and the culture that we talked about, or it be our natural resources. And even conservatism has the term conservation. I mean, it's the same root word. And so it's important to protect our natural resources because of because we have a real connection in South Carolina. We historically have a real connection to the land. We've been an agrarian state until the last few decades. We used to, back in the 1960s, 70s, and before, we had to bribe companies to move here because we had the Civil War, Reconstruction, the Great Depression, and nothing was going on in the South. I mean, we were still devastated from the Civil War, and the Industrial Revolution passed us by, basically, except for a few textile mills in the upstate and the shipyard in Charleston. And we would do anything to bribe a business to come here. And so we really got conditioned in the General Assembly to do economic development incentive packages, and I call that bribing them to move here.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
I've been saying for years to members, you're living in a time warp if you think we still have to do that. You're living in a time warp. You still think it's the 1960s or 70s or 50s. But I got to tell you a little secret. You don't have to bribe people to move to paradise.
Exactly.
The question is, can you preserve paradise in the face of them coming? And we have seen that massive, and I was the lone voice for years in the General Assembly, and now because Charleston, the area I'm from, was the point of the spear where this extraordinary growth, first started showing up in the 1990s, really, late 90s and early 2000s. And now, and no one anywhere else in the state would pay any attention to it. But now everyone, other members, I'm talking about very conservative members, saying, man, we got to do something about all this growth. I mean, I never have any constituents, I can tell you that, I never have any constituents say what we need is more people moving here. I got plenty of constituents say, what is happening to my home? What is happening to my culture? What is happening to our natural resources? And so it's really growth, and excessive growth is one of the is a root cause of a majority of the issues that I have to address is probably a function of that. And I determined a long time ago, I authored the South Carolina Conservation Bank Act when I was in the House. I got it passed into law in 2002. It was first funded in 2004. And what it does is it creates a competitive grant process where land trusts can apply for grants to buy conservation easements from willing sellers, and state agencies, resource agencies can on a competitive basis get a grant to buy new public access hunting land, like new WMA lands or a new park. And because of the competitive grant process, we have been very, very efficient because we require leverage. Meaning, if you want $500,000 of conservation, if you have an easement you want to put on your land that's worth $500,000, well, we'll give you $100,000, and you got to go get some conservation, yourself. Like, get your neighbor. If you do an easement in your property, your neighbor will donate an easement, and Ducks Unlimited will throw in some money for a piece to help purchase and improve a waterfowl impoundment owned by the state next door. And so leverage is key if you're going to be a successful recipient of a grant from the Conservation Bank. I like to say it's conservation by negotiation and compensation, not by regulation. Nothing happens till a property owner agrees to a conservation easement, which is basically giving away your development rights, is pretty much what it is. You can still hunt, fish, grow timber, build whatever you normally would build on a farm or a hunting piece of property, barns, but you're not going to grow golf courses and condos,
right?
And you're not going or tract homes. And the Conservation Bank, since its inception, has protected over 330,000 acres of land in South Carolina at a little over $500 an acre.
Yeah,
which is a bargain deal. And some of the most significant lands that we've protected has come through the Conservation Bank. And I wanted when I drafted that, I wanted a free market way to do conservation. I mean, the typical approach to conservation was always a highly regulatory approach. This person wants to develop this formerly beautiful piece of property. We want to stop them. So we're going to show up at meetings, and we're going to want you to deny their building permits, and we're going to litigate when it comes to their land disturbance permits from DHEC and all that. So I didn't want to do it any that way. I wanted to negotiate and compensate landowners, in part, not fully, for doing the conservation, and it's been wildly successful.
Hugely successful.
Yeah, and so anyway, that's the explanation of it. But go ahead and ask me.
No, I mean, you touched on exactly what I wanted to get to, which was the Conservation Bank and what it was. Most people listening probably didn't understand or don't understand what that is. You and I have been involved in those deals in the past and understand it, but there's not a lot of people, I would think, that do, because it has the reputation of being for wealthy landowners. I have literally heard the debate on the House floor when I was in the House, and I've heard it from folks that do not own large tracts of land. The devil's advocate argument that you often hear is, this isn't for public consumption. And you and I had a debate on this, or a discussion on this one day, in which you completely convinced me. But I mean, your answer was essentially, we have to preserve this piece of property somehow. The private landowner that owns the property happens to be a wealthy individual. Who else is supposed to conserve it, and who else is supposed to own it, and how else are we supposed to get it? You know, I'm paraphrasing what your conversation with me was, but I thought it's impactful. There's no way that me, if I was a wealthy private landowner, there's no way I'd say, yeah, I'll take $500 an acre for my 1,000 acres, and the state wants me to allow this to be a public WMA. I'm going to say no. No, thank you. No, thank you. I'll go back to owning my land without an easement, which is worth $5,000 an acre as opposed to $1,500 an acre. And so,
well,
go ahead.
The average price when it comes to fee simple, where you have full public access, is about a little over $2,000, $2,300.
Sure.
The average price on an easement per acre is $200 an acre.
Yeah.
So it's a massive difference.
Significant decrease.
And it enables you to do conservation on an ecosystem scale, which is really important. That's the meaningful conservation, and we've done that in South Carolina in the Ace Basin. We've done it in the Santee Delta. Yeah. My two favorite places on earth are the Ace Basin and the Santee Delta, and those are protected on an ecosystem scale, really through conservation easements, and that's the only way you can do it. If you're just buying fee simple title, it costs you too much, and it's not. We do protect small working farms too. We do. I talked to someone last night who I didn't know. He had received a conservation bank grant, say over 1,000 acres, but he wasn't a wealthy person. He had inherited it from family, and a lot of it was impoundment, a title impoundment, which is great for waterfowl. And he got a conservation bank grant that helped him, protect that and keep it from ever being sold, because he did have upland that could be sold, and it's right down there in the Ace Basin.
Yep.
And it's beautiful property, that 60, 180 acres of upland. I mean, you can put a lot of houses on something like that. And he put an easement on it, and he's not a wealthy person. I mean, there are easements on 20 acres, 40 acres. But so you both have both the wealthy and those who are not wealthy and couldn't do the conservation unless it were the easement that is funded by the conservation bank.
Well, and here's the hard truth that a lot of people either don't know or don't want to understand. Without large landowners, without the large plantations who are doing the work to preserve the wetlands, who are doing the work to preserve the managed wetlands, what we call rice fields on the coast, South Carolina would not have the duck population that we have.
Amen.
You wouldn't have public water duck hunting in South Carolina without the work that has been done by the Conservation Bank and the work that's been done by private landowners who are putting their money and their time into bringing ducks to South Carolina. You just wouldn't have it, period.
No, you wouldn't. And we're unique in that, it's only coastal South Carolina, a little bit of northern Georgia coast, but not much, where the tidal fluctuation was just right. The reason you didn't have large rice fields in North Carolina or Georgia, in most of Georgia, is because the tidal fluctuation needed to be just right in order to flood your seed bed for growing rice when needed, and then take the water off when needed at certain times. So you had to have a certain tidal fluctuation. It was only along this coast. And the reason that there's a great book written by Virginia Beach, Dana Beach's wife, called Rice and Ducks, or Ducks and Rice, I can't remember, but basically makes the point that it's the rice impoundments in the Ace Basin and the Santee Delta that could be picked up in the early 20th century by people like the Yankees and the E.F. Hutton and the DuPont and
Brooks.
Baruch, could be picked up for just almost